Thank you for attending today's training on special education and early intervention decision makers for children in foster care. In the chat, you will find a link where you can access the PowerPoint slides and other handouts for this training. My name is Stephanie Klitsch, and I'm the Assistant Director of the Education Law Program at Council for Children's Rights. I also serve as the co-chair of the Model Court Advisory Committee's Special Education Decision Maker Work Group. There are several other members of the work group who helped develop this training and will be presenting portions of it today. I'm going to have them introduce themselves now, starting with Cindy.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Cindy Scruggs-Johnson. I'm a GAL supervisor and the co-chair of the special education work group.
Good afternoon. My name is Coretta Pelham. I am the Permanency Planning Social Worker for Mecklenburg County Department of Social Services.
Good afternoon. This is Christy Graham. I'm one of the senior attorneys with YFS.
Hello, I'm Kim Capuano. I am the Compliance Program Manager for the Exceptional Children Department of Charlotte Mecklenburg Schools.
Hello, I'm Jill Leaford. I'm one of the educational liaisons. I work between Charlotte Mecklenburg Schools and the Mecklenburg County Department of Social Services.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lindsay Moss. I'm a case management unit supervisor with Children's Developmental Service Agency. We provide early intervention services to children ages birth to 3, and I supervise a team that works closely with Youth and Family Services.
Hi, everybody. I'm Maggie Timothy, and I am one parent defender.
Thank you. And we know that this training is mandatory for many of you. Your organization will be notified that you have completed this training after you have completed the post-training survey. We'll share the link to that survey at the end of the training. We have reserved time at the end of the training today to answer questions. As we go through the materials, please feel free to put your comments and questions in the chat. Cindy Scruggs-Johnson will be monitoring the chat and compiling the questions for us to review and answer at the end of the training. We want you to walk away today with a complete understanding of this process, so please do not hesitate to ask any questions you may have. Here's a look at our agenda for the training today. We will briefly discuss the reason for the training and cover some important preliminary terms. Next, we will discuss the Who Can Serve as Parent/SEDM DSS GAL worksheet. We'll cover all of the details you need to know about this process in a who, what, when, and how format. We will then cover court hearings and associated orders. Next, we will discuss the LEA version of the worksheet. We'll move into collaboration and information sharing, and then end with resources and next steps. Our hope is that we will make this information as practical as possible. We want you to understand the new processes that have been put into place and what you need to do to fulfill the new expectations. The procedures we describe are mandatory for YFS and GAL, and you are expected to begin using these processes immediately.
So the information here will likely not be a surprise to anybody, but we wanted to briefly share the statistics to frame the conversation. Data around the educational performance of children in foster care is sobering. These children are more likely to be below grade level, retained, suspended or expelled, or to receive special education services. The processes we will cover today will not by themselves transform the data, but they will help to ensure that children in foster care have at least one identified ineffective education decision maker. So the focus of today's training is determining who makes the education decisions for children in foster care. To effectively support these children, it's critical to know who holds the education rights. And as you will see, the answer is particularly complicated when it comes to kids who receive early intervention or special education services. And before we can answer that question, you need to have at least a beginning understanding of those terms: early intervention and special education. So throughout the training, we're going to be introducing important terms that are critical to review to understand the processes we're going to put in place. And we're going to spend the next few minutes reviewing the terms on this slide so we can begin to answer the important question of who makes education decisions for children in foster care.
First, we wanted to briefly review early intervention services and some important terms related to early intervention services. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, is the law that governs early intervention services. Early intervention services are a system of supports and services to children under the age of 3 who are either experiencing a developmental delay or who have been diagnosed with a condition that has a high probability of resulting in a developmental delay. It involves a team of different disciplines working alongside families to support child learning and development within and across all daily activities. Early intervention services fall under the North Carolina Infant Toddler Program, which works through 16 CDSAs, or Children's Developmental Service Agencies, or CDSAs. In Mecklenburg County, we're technically a contract early intervention agency. We are county government employees, and we contract with the state to provide early intervention services specifically to children and families in Mecklenburg County. The CDSAs are the local lead agencies responsible for early intervention services. An Individualized Family Service Plan, or IFSP. Children who receive early intervention services have an Individualized Family Service Plan, or IFSP, developed when they are enrolled in the program. Supports and services offered through early intervention include things like service coordination, physical, occupational, and speech language therapies, family support, special instruction, assistive technology, and family training and counseling, or infant mental health services. These services are included on the IFSP. The IFSP is developed by the team supporting the child and family, and reviews of the IFSP must occur every 6 months following the date of the signing of the initial plan.
The next term we want to cover is special education. Like early intervention services, IDEA governs special education services. IDEA governs local educational agencies, also known as LEAs, to provide special education services to children ages 3 to 21 who meet certain criteria. We'll briefly review the eligibility criteria on the next slide. A local educational agency is a public board of education or other public authority that administers public schools. This includes public school districts, charter schools, and approved North Carolina psychiatric residential treatment facilities, also known as PRTFs. A private school is not an LEA. We want you to understand that children who receive special education services have an individualized education program, also known as an IEP. They're called exceptional children, abbreviated as EC, which is a North Carolina specific term. Ultimately, when we're talking about EC services, IEP services, or special education, we're talking about the same services, and we can use these terms interchangeably. So who gets special education? For a child to receive special education services, the child must meet all of the following criteria. They must be between the ages of 3 and 21, meet the criteria for at least one of 14 disability eligibility categories, have a disability that adversely affects their educational performance and requires specially designed instruction. The next important term that we're going to briefly define is a Section 504 plan. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 is a federal law prohibiting recipients of federal funds from discriminating based on disability. All public schools receive federal money, so Section 504 applies to all public school districts and charter schools. The definition of disability under Section 504 is different than under special education law. To qualify for a Section 504 plan, the Section 504 team must determine, first, whether a physical or mental impairment exists. And you should know that Section 504 has a much broader definition of disability than special education law. Second, the impairment must substantially limit a bodily function or major life activity. This is interpreted quite broadly and includes things like walking, breathing, hearing, reading, learning, performing manual tasks, concentrating, or caring for oneself. And lastly, the child must need accommodations, modifications, related services, or supports to benefit from their education at a level similar to their non-disabled peers. This is where it must be shown that the impairment causes the child to need some accommodations or modifications so that the child can have access to their education. As there's often a lot of confusion about the differences between IEPs and Section 504 plans, we have included a brief summary here. All children who receive special education services have an IEP. Children with IEPs receive some amount of specially designed instruction with a special education teacher. Specially designed instruction is adapting the content, methodology, or delivery of instruction to meet the unique needs of a child that results from the child's disability. Section 504 plans, however, are for children with disabilities whose needs do not rise to the level of requiring specially designed instruction from a special education teacher. These children receive all of their instruction in a general education environment. They receive accommodations and/or modifications that their general education teacher can implement to allow the child to have access to their education. If a child has an IEP, they do not require a Section 504 plan because everything that would be on the Section 504 plan would be incorporated into the IEP.
Now that we have reviewed some relevant terms, we can return to the question of who makes education decisions for children in foster care. When a child enters DSS custody, the DSS child welfare worker assumes the majority of the child's education rights. That includes the ability to enroll and withdraw a child from school, the rights associated with school discipline, such as appealing a suspension, and the rights associated with Section 504, such as requesting a Section 504 plan. Despite assuming all of these rights, DSS child welfare workers do not hold a child's early intervention or special education rights. The answer to who does hold a child's early intervention or special education rights is the heart of the training today. The answer is quite fact specific. So we have created a process in juvenile court to help the people involved in the child's life to determine who will make those early intervention and special education decisions. Before we delve into the juvenile court process about identifying who can make early intervention and special education services decisions, we want to be really clear about which children fall under this process. The process we are about to review applies to all of the following groups of children in the custody of Mecklenburg County DSS. Children suspected to need early intervention services and children who receive early intervention services, children suspected to need special education services, and children who receive special education services. It does not apply to children who have Section 504 plans because we have already reviewed that the DSS child welfare worker holds those education rights. This process applies no matter where children are placed or the type of placement. For example, a child could be located in a different county or placed in any type of setting, from a trial placement with a parent to a PRTF. This process also applies whether or not the children attend Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools, or CMS. We will review later some information about what CMS is doing internally that is related to this work and some resources that are specific to children in CMS. The title of this slide is a mouthful: Parent/Special Education/Early Intervention Decision Maker, abbreviated to Parent/SEDM. Under IDEA, the individual who makes early intervention and special education decisions is referred to as the child's parent. We put the term parent in quotations because, as you will soon see, this individual may be someone other than a child's biological or adoptive parent. Since using the word parent can be confusing, we have incorporated a more descriptive term of special education decision maker, or SEDM. We also did not want to leave out early intervention services, so we've included early intervention as well, but we have abbreviated the whole phrase to parent/SEDM. When talking to school or CDSA staff, they likely will be more familiar with the term parent than SEDM.
What and when? So far, we have reviewed that DSS, child welfare workers, are not allowed to act as child's parent/SEDM. We will now transition to discussing what process is for the juvenile court stakeholders to determine who is eligible to be a parent/SEDM. We have created a worksheet called the Who Can Serve as Parent Special Education, Early Intervention, Decision Maker, DSS, GAL worksheet. We are about to review this worksheet in detail. The worksheet is expected to be completed jointly by DSS child welfare worker and GAL volunteer at each of the following times: when the child first enters DSS custody, before each placement change, and before each court hearing. When the worksheet is completed before each court hearing, it must be submitted to the court as an attachment to the DSS court summary or GAL court report at every hearing. Since it is completed jointly between DSS and GAL, the child welfare worker and GAL volunteer can decide who will attach it to their court report. When a child first enters DSS custody and before each placement change, a facilitated CFT meeting happens. We suggest that the DSS child welfare worker and GAL volunteer complete the worksheet at that time.
We are going to work through a series of screenshots of the DSS GAL worksheet. If you have not already begun using this form on your cases, please immediately begin to do so. You will see that there are certain words in blue. The words in blue indicate that that word or phrase has a definition. When you hover over that word in the form, the definition will appear. The definitions can also be found on the SEDM resource website, which we will tell you more about at the end of the training. The worksheet begins with information about who is completing the form, the child in question, the date of completion, and the date of the next abuse, neglect, dependency hearing. Even if there is a sibling group where multiple children have IEPs, each child needs their own form. This portion of the form also has the instructions we just reviewed. The first question the form asks is whether the court has previously ordered a specific individual to serve as the parent/SEDM. This introduces the role of the juvenile court in this process. IDEA allows the judge overseeing the child's child welfare case to appoint an individual to serve as the parent/SEDM. We will review this appointment order a little later. If the court has ordered someone, you put the name down on the line. If you are satisfied with that individual continuing to serve that role, then you are done with the form. If the court has not ordered someone to serve as parent/SEDM, or if you would like the court-ordered individual to change, you then complete the remainder of the form. The next portion of the form asks for the names and contact information for the child and family team, the CFT. It is important that this is filled out accurately and with current contact information. This worksheet may be shared with the child's school, and this will help the school have contact information for the CFT. The next portion of the worksheet gets into individuals in a child's life that may be eligible to serve as the parent/SEDM. There are two tables with these questions. The first table asks about the status of the rights of the child's parents. If the parents' rights have been terminated or relinquished, you would answer yes. There's also NA as an option. For instance, if a parent is deceased or if the child does not have adoptive parents. The final column of the table states, if the answer is no, the individual can serve as the parent/SEDM. Let's briefly discuss a biological or adoptive parent's rights to make early intervention or special education decisions when their child enters DSS custody. When a child enters DSS custody, their biological or adoptive parents maintain their early intervention and special education rights. This shows how strongly Congress wanted to protect the rights of parents when it comes to early intervention and special education decisions. While the court can choose to take away a parent's early intervention and special education rights, there are no circumstances whereby a parent's rights to make early intervention or special education decisions are automatically taken away. Therefore, if there has not been a termination or relinquishment of a parent's rights, the parent is still eligible to serve as the parent/SEDM. As we will discuss more in a moment, the biological or adoptive parents are presumed to continue to serve as the parent/SEDM. Before we continue to the next table on the worksheet, we want to briefly review a few additional important terms that you need to understand to complete the form. The first is therapeutic foster home. Therapeutic foster parents have received additional appropriate training, which allows the child's placement in the home to be considered a behavioral health treatment service. In North Carolina, therapeutic foster parents are not allowed to serve as the parent/SEDM for a child in their care, which is different than a non-therapeutic foster placement where they would be eligible to serve as a parent/SEDM. The next term is kinship placement. Kinship care refers to a placement with relatives or close family friends. As we will learn through the worksheet, kinship placements are able to serve as parent/SEDM. The last term we will review before looking at the table on the worksheet is surrogate parent. The CDSA or LEA has the responsibility to assign a surrogate parent when they are unable to identify or locate anyone to serve as the parent/SEDM. This does not apply in situations when the court has appointed a parent/SEDM, because if the court has ordered someone to serve that role, the CDSA or LEA is not allowed to choose someone different. If the court has not weighed in, however, and the CDSA/LEA cannot identify or locate a parent/SEDM, it is their responsibility to assign a surrogate parent volunteer. Here is the table from the DSS-GAL worksheet to help determine if there are others eligible in the child's life to serve as the parent/SEDM. The first question asks whether the child is living in a family non-therapeutic foster home. If they are, the foster parent can serve as the parent/SEDM. The next question asks whether the child had a guardian prior to entering DSS custody. If that is the case, the guardian would be eligible to serve as the parent/SEDM. The third question is whether the child is living with extended family or other natural support. If so, that kinship placement may serve as the parent/SEDM. Lastly, the table asks whether the CDSA or LEA has assigned a surrogate parent. If so, that person may be able to serve as the parent/SEDM. The tables we just reviewed are the heart of the form. This next question asks you to list all of the people from the tables who may be eligible to act as the child's parent/SEDM. These are the categories of people that the IDEA allowed to serve as the parent/SEDM without requiring a court order. We'll discuss in a couple minutes how someone other than one of these individuals could be court appointed to be the parent/SEDM. There's also a question here that asks whether the court has specifically determined that any of these eligible individuals not be able to serve as parent/SEDM or make education decisions. This is not a particularly common scenario. Before completing the worksheet, it prompts you to review the section at the bottom entitled Court-Ordered Parent/SEDM. So we will review that information now. Part of the purpose of the DSS-GAL worksheet is to allow the court the opportunity to appoint someone to serve as the parent/SEDM. If someone is court appointed to be the parent/SEDM, that individual will serve in that role unless modified by court order. There are several benefits to a court-ordered parent/SEDM. First, it provides clarity to the CFT and the CDSA or LEA about who is serving this role. In a few moments, we will review the complicated determination of who plays this role if there are multiple eligible individuals, but one has not been appointed by the court. Second, it provides consistency even if the child changes schools, CDSAs, or LEAs. For instance, if instead a surrogate parent is assigned by the LEA, the surrogate is likely not going to continue to play this role if the child moves to a different LEA. The new LEA would assign their own volunteer surrogate parent, which creates a lot of transition for the children. Instead, with a court order, the individual appointed will continue to stay as the child's parent/SEDM until the court modifies that order. Third, court orders expand the options of who may serve the role. Courts are able to appoint anyone we've already discussed to act as the parent/SEDM, such as the biological or adoptive parent, a non-therapeutic foster parent, a former guardian, or a kinship placement. Additionally, however, they can choose instead a different supportive individual in the child's life. We have included some examples here, such as an adult sibling, a grandparent, other extended family, fictive kin, or natural supports. This is a power that only the court has. A CDSA or LEA would be unable to choose one of these individuals to act as the parent/SEDM without a court order. The last question of the worksheet asks whether you are requesting that the court appoint a parent/SEDM or change the current parent/SEDM. In order to answer this question, you want to have taken time to consider the options and determine who is most appropriate to serve this role. If you answered yes, it is important to include this as a specific recommendation in the DSS court summary and GAL court report. While this worksheet should be attached to the court report, it should be specifically brought to the court's attention so that the judge can make the determination and the order can be signed. The explanation at the bottom of the worksheet goes over a couple common scenarios. Both of them involve situations when the court has not appointed an individual as parent/SEDM. The first is when the tables on the worksheet reveal that there are multiple individuals who are eligible to serve as the parent/SEDM. Perhaps the biological mom still has her parental rights and the child is living in a kinship placement with her aunt. When there are multiple individuals who could serve as parent/SEDM, the law clearly states that the biological or adoptive parents are presumed to serve as the parents/SEDMs if attempting to exercise their early intervention or special education rights. For instance, if both the mom and the aunt show up to an IEP meeting, the LEA should be looking to the mom to provide consent and to sign off as the parent/SEDM. That does not mean that the aunt needs to leave the meeting. We'll talk more about invitations to IEP meetings later, but it means that the mom gets to play that important decision-making role. If the biological or adoptive parent is not currently engaged in the education process, the CDSA or LEA and the CFT should diligently attempt to secure their involvement. The CDSA or LEA and the CFT should engage in repeated attempts to contact the biological or adoptive parents to encourage them to exercise their rights. As part of that process, the DSS child welfare worker should contact the parent's attorney to seek their assistance with engaging the parent. If the CDSA and LEA and CFT are unsuccessful in getting the biological or adoptive parents to participate, then the other eligible individuals may serve as parent/SEDM. It's very important to note here the difference between a biological or adoptive parent not wanting to participate at all versus a biological or adoptive parent who does not want the child to receive early intervention or special education services. If the biological or adoptive parent disagrees with the child receiving services, that disagreement cannot be a reason that the CDSA or LEA chooses a different eligible individual to serve as the parent/SEDM role. In that situation, the CFT should bring the issue to the court's attention to determine what is in the child's best interest. The last scenario the worksheet contemplates is when there is no court order and no parent/SEDM can be identified. This would mean that when the worksheet was completed, there was no one in the tables that was determined to be eligible. In this situation, the CDSA or LEA has the responsibility to assign a surrogate parent. A surrogate parent should not be assigned if there's anyone else in the child's life who is eligible, such as a biological or adoptive parent, non-therapeutic foster parent, former guardian, or kinship placement. But in this scenario, there is no one who is eligible, and the court has not appointed anyone. The LEA or CDSA must assign a volunteer surrogate parent. We have already talked about how DSS child welfare workers and therapeutic foster parents are not allowed to be the parent/SEDM. As a final point to this understanding of who may and may not serve as a child's parent/SEDM, we have listed here some additional individuals who are not allowed to serve as parent/SEDM. North Carolina Guardian Ad Litem policy, GAL policy, states that they cannot serve as SEDM for the child they represent. Residential placement providers are also not allowed. This includes group home staff and staff of PRTFs.
Now, we have discussed who the DSS GAL worksheet is for, what it is, and when it is to be completed. Let's now discuss how it is to be completed. The worksheet is available in 2 different formats depending on your preference. It is either a fillable PDF or a Word worksheet. Since the worksheet will be completed at regular intervals, we suggest updating the most current version of it each time, so do you not need to start with a blank form each time. We suggest that the DSS child welfare worker create a OneDrive folder with the worksheet and share it with the GAL volunteer. That way, both individuals can have access to the same version. If using the Word version in OneDrive, it can even be a collaborative document where both people can be updating it. Once you have completed the worksheet each time, send it to CMS DSS Educational Liaison.
Okay, we are going to run through a couple of examples. The first is Brianna. She is 2 years old and in DSS custody. She lives with her grandmother, Deborah. The permanency plan is reunification with her mother, Alicia. The identity of the father is unknown, and Brianna receives early intervention services. Because she receives early intervention services, a who can serve as parent or SEDM DSS GAL worksheet needs to be completed. Here is a glimpse of how we would fill out the tables for Brianna's worksheet. In the first table, we will fill out the information for the parents. For the mother, Alicia, her parental rights have not been terminated or relinquished, so we would answer no. This means that Alicia is eligible to serve as the parent or SEDM. The father is unknown, so that is indicated in the table. In the second table, she is not living in a foster home. We also do not have information that she lived with a guardian before entering DSS custody. The answer is yes to a kinship placement because she's living with her grandmother, Deborah. Therefore, Deborah is eligible also to serve as the parent SEDM. The last question asks about a surrogate parent, and we do not have information to suggest that the CDSA has assigned a surrogate parent. Based on the answers here, both Alicia, the mom, and Deborah, the grandmother, are eligible to serve as the parent SEDM. From what we've learned, I want us to think through a couple of questions. I'm going to pause for a couple of moments after each question to give you a chance to think through the answers on your own. If you're willing, please put your answers in the chat. Unfortunately, we do not have time to break into groups to discuss these scenarios in detail, but if you want to try to think about how you would answer these questions, one of your handouts from today's training has the scenarios, questions, and answers for you to review in more detail at your convenience. Who should the CDSA be using to make early intervention service decisions? That's the first question. So I'm going to pause for a minute and let you all have a chance to respond. Great. So we've got a couple responses that say the parent or the mother. Yes. So while both the mom and the grandmother are eligible, the presumption is that it is the mom, Alicia. This presumption comes from the law. This seems especially important here since the plan is reunification. Oh, I recognize several names in the chat from social workers that we have worked with or supervisors we have worked with. It's nice to see your names for sure. Okay, the second question is, without a court order appointing someone to serve as Brianna's parent or SEDM, under what circumstances could the CDSA use the grandmother instead of the mother as the parent or SEDM? So the question is, under what circumstances could the CDSA use the grandmother instead of the mom as the, yep, thank you, unable to locate the mother? Yes. Right. So thank you for those of you that responded. So this question is really asking about when the presumption for using the biological parent can be overridden. First, the CDSA would need to work with the CFT to encourage the mom to exercise her rights. If the mom is able to be located, then the CDSA and CFT would have to repeatedly try to get the mom to participate. If those efforts are unsuccessful, then the CDSA could use the grandmother instead. And then the last question for this scenario is, could the court take action here to determine the parent or SEDM? Lots of answers coming in. Great. Thank you all. So yes, the court could appoint the mom, the grandmother, or someone else to serve as the parent or SEDM. The answers to the first two questions were about what happens if the court has not weighed in on the issue, but the court can weigh in at any time and determine who will be the parent or SEDM.
Thanks, Lindsay. And just to clarify from the last answer in the chat, the court can make that appointment right from the beginning. They don't have to nobody has to try to get in touch with the parent first. The court's able to weigh in at any time. Our next example is Jaden, an 11-year-old 6th grade student attending a charter school. Jaden has been in DSS custody for the past 2 years and is placed in a therapeutic foster placement in Rowan County. His mom, Deja, lives in another state, and no one has heard from her in the last 6 months. His dad, Daryl, lives locally, but does not have a particularly good relationship with the child and family team. Daryl misses more visits with Jaden than he attends. Jaden has been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and has been clinically recommended to receive mental health services. But Daryl doesn't believe he actually has PTSD or needs any services. When members of the CFT or school staff have a call or a meeting with him, Daryl gets easily agitated and cusses everyone out. The judge in the case recently made reunification with either parent a secondary permanency goal. Jaden is struggling in school. He is failing his classes and regularly experiencing behavioral challenges. Jaden's therapist suspects that Jaden needs special education services. Here's a glimpse of the tables on the worksheet for Jaden. For the first table, both biological parents still have their parental rights. Therefore, the answer to each question is no. Both of the parents are therefore eligible to serve as parent/SEDM because they still have their parental rights. In the second table, all of the answers are no. He is in a therapeutic foster placement, so the therapeutic foster parent is ineligible to serve as the parent/SEDM. He does not have a former guardian, is not in a kinship placement, and does not have a surrogate parent. Therefore, the tables in the worksheet indicate that the only individuals eligible that the school district could use without a court order as the parent/SEDM would be the mom and dad. Let's work through some questions about this situation. Again, please keep up that participation and put some answers in the chat for me. The first is, Jaden doesn't have an IEP. Why is a worksheet being completed? Anyone willing to put an idea in the chat? Okay, submitted at each hearing when a child enters custody. But we are not asking you to do this for every child on your caseload. So the thing here is suspected to need special education. So if the CFT suspects that Jaden may require special education services, which the therapist is suggesting here, the first step is to complete this worksheet to see who would be eligible to serve as his parent/SEDM. It is important when evaluating your caseload to think about any students who may need an IEP, even if they do not have one. For those students, a worksheet should be completed. The parent/SEDM is the person who should request the special education evaluation. If someone other than the parent/SEDM, such as the DSS child welfare worker, makes the request, then the LEA is supposed to reach out to the parent/SEDM within 30 days, and the EC evaluation process cannot move forward without the parent/SEDM's consent. It is often much more efficient to first identify the parent/SEDM. Our second question is, no one has heard from Deja, the mom, in 6 months. How does that impact her rights? All right, we've got one answer so far. Anyone else? Okay, so I see a surrogate parent will be assigned. That's not necessarily true. So let's talk about what happens with Deja here. Nobody's heard from her. She is able to serve as the parent/SEDM as long as she is able to be identified and located. We have a definition of unable to locate embedded in the worksheet. Ultimately, the CFT and the LEA should engage in diligent efforts to try to locate and engage Deja. It's important to loop in Deja's attorney to see if the attorney can help get in contact with Deja. So just because nobody's heard from her, we can't assume that she's unable to be located and unable to be engaged in this process. And here, we're not going to be able to have a surrogate parent, and that's part of this next question. So number 3, if Deja cannot be located and Daryl is acting inappropriately, the dad, can the LEA assign a surrogate parent? And so I know I just answered that, so I'll give an explanation for why. So we can't assign a surrogate parent here. LEAs must assign a surrogate parent if they cannot identify or locate someone eligible to serve as the parent/SEDM. If there is any eligible parent able to be located, then the LEA must use that person as the parent/SEDM. The LEA does not have any option to choose anyone other than Deja and or Daryl to act as the parent/SEDM here. Here, if Daryl is able to be located, even if he's acting inappropriately, the LEA would have to work with him as the parent/SEDM. And question number 4 is, what other options does the CFT have? Anyone feeling brave? Explore former teachers to serve, attempt to identify alternative supports that can act as the SEDM. Right, yes, both of these answers are correct. So what the last question showed us is that the LEA, the school district here, doesn't have other options, but the CFT does. So if the CFT determines that neither parent is appropriate to make special education decisions for Jaden, the team should consider requesting that the court appoint someone else to serve as the parent/SEDM. And this is when the CFT needs to think creatively and explore supports in Jaden's life. The team should talk to Jaden about who he trusts and feels comfortable with in his life. There may be some options here outside of who the CFT would typically consider if engaging in a placement search for him. For instance, is there a former teacher or mentor? Is there a relative who can't commit to being a placement for him, but may be willing to play this role for Jaden? If there is a viable option, the DSS child welfare worker and GAL volunteer should request that the court appoint that individual. Our last example is Sarah, a 15-year-old in the 10th grade. She has been in DSS custody for the past 4 years. Sarah currently resides in a PRTF in Wake County. She has experienced 4 placement changes over the past year. A month ago, the court terminated the parental rights of both of her parents, Robert and Michelle. Sarah has an IEP, and the annual review of the IEP is due in a few weeks. Here are the tables on the worksheet for Sarah. In the first table, the parents' parental rights have been terminated. Therefore, you answer yes, which means that the parents cannot serve as the parent/SEDM. In the second table, the answer to each question is no. Sarah resides in a PRTF, so she does not have a foster parent or kinship placement. She also does not have a former guardian or a surrogate parent. As you can see, no one is eligible to serve as Sarah's parent/SEDM. So our first question is, who's the LEA here? Okay, so the responses are her local school or her high school. So the answer here, and why we wanted to bring this up specifically, because it gets tricky, it's the PRTF that's serving in that role for children in North Carolina. So the PRTF should be identifying who is making those special education decisions. And then the court has not ordered anyone as parent/SEDM. So what does the LEA need to do? All right, I see all those responses. Identify a surrogate. Absolutely. So this is the scenario when it is the LEA's responsibility to assign a surrogate parent to serve as Sarah's parent/SEDM. And this needs to happen quickly, as the surrogate parent will need to become familiar with Sarah and her child and family team before the upcoming IEP meeting. Thank you all for your participation with these scenarios.
All right, so now that we have discussed the who, what, when, and how of the DSS GAL worksheet, we'll briefly review how this applies in court hearings. So in order to adequately address education concerns that may be happening for a child in DSS custody, we've developed some model questions that judges can use during their hearings. All juvenile court stakeholders should expect these questions to be asked and be prepared to answer them. So the questions on this slide are specifically for non-secure custody hearings. The first question asks whether a best interest determination meeting has been held or if one is scheduled. So we will not go into everything about the BID meetings. A complete overview of what those meetings are is beyond the scope of this training. But as a way of a brief explanation, the Fostering Connections to Success in Increasing Adoptions Act of 2008, which is Fostering Connections, and then the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, require that every child remain in their school of origin unless there's a determination made that it's not in that child's best interest. The decision as to what is in the child's best interest takes place at this BID meeting. These meetings should occur when a child enters the non-secure custody of a Department of Social Services or a county child welfare agency and before any placement change. Okay, this definition is included on the parent/SEDM resource website with the definitions of all the other terms that we've gone over today. So you'll be able to have access to that. The next questions ask about whether the child has an IFSP, an IEP, or a Section 504 plan. For children who have an IFSP or IEP, it asks if the DSS/GAL worksheet has been completed, who is making those decisions, and whether any party is recommending that the court appoint someone to make these decisions. And then the last question for the non-secure custody hearings is whether there are other education concerns for the child. For all other hearings, parties can expect the judge to ask the questions from the non-secure custody hearings along with these additional questions. The first is whether a request for an IFSP, IEP, or Section 504 plan needs to be submitted to the CDSA or LEA. The next series of questions has to do with how the child's educational needs are being met and their plans for the future. So these include, is the child attending school on a regular basis? Does the child have adequate transportation to school? How is the child doing in school? How are challenges being addressed? And are there any potential barriers related to the child's education that can be addressed by the court, the agency, and the caregiver? And these questions highlight the importance of the child's education and helps ensure that their needs are being met. So we prepared an order to be used when the judge appoints a parent/SEDM. This order allows the appointed individual to have all the rights and authority granted to a parent under IDEA, including access to records about the child, as well as the ability to share early intervention or special education services records that are necessary to secure appropriate early intervention or special education services for the child. So now copies of the order need to be distributed to the following parties: DSS, the GAL should have a copy, CDSA or the LEA, parent attorneys need to have a copy of this order, the DSS CMS educational liaison, and then any appointed parent/SEDM. The majority of the time here in Mecklenburg County, our practice will be that the GAL attorney advocate prepares this order and distributes it to the parties named above. For CMS students, the DSS CMS educational liaison will assist with sending the order to Kimberly Stewart with the EC department and to the individual school. So it's important that all members of the CFT have ready access to this order to share when it's necessary. Here's a screenshot of the main part of the order that will need to be completed. And there are two different options for boxes to check. The first box is checked if the individual being appointed as the parent/SEDM is the child's biological or adoptive parent, the foster parent, guardian, or kinship placement. If the individual is someone other than one of those people, the second box is checked. The other order we wanted to review is the Education Decisions Documentation Order. This is an order that can be used as a documentation to give to the LEAs to show that there has been a termination or a relinquishment of parental rights or a suspension or termination of the right to make education decisions. And the purpose of this order is to have the official documentation to provide to the LEA to show the status of a parent's rights without having to reveal confidential information about the case. This does not need to be routinely completed and probably will not be, but it can be generated if an LEA is requesting the information to verify the status of parental rights. It should not be necessary if the court has ordered a parent/SEDM.
Well, so far we've discussed what the juvenile court community will do in relation to determining who will serve as the parent or SEDM. Now we're transitioning briefly to talk about the LEA. We've talked a lot about the court's ability to order someone to serve as the parent or SEDM. When there's not a court order in place, however, it is the CDSA or LEA that is responsible for determining who is serving as the parent or SEDM. To make that decision, the CDSA or LEA uses the legal framework we have reviewed. We decided to create a version of the worksheet that could assist LEAs with the process. The worksheet first asks if there is a court order appointing an individual to serve as a parent or SEDM. If so, the worksheet stops as that court order dictates who will serve. If there is no court order, the worksheet walks through very similar questions to the DSS-GAL worksheet that we just reviewed to help determine if there is anyone in the child's life who can serve as the parent or SEDM. In the situation where there are multiple individuals eligible to serve, the worksheet provides a space to document the efforts of the LEA and the child and family team to reach the biological adoptive parents to encourage them to exercise their rights. In the situation where there is no one eligible to serve as a parent or SEDM, the worksheet prompts the LEA to assign a surrogate parent. We're not going to go through the worksheet in detail today, but we want you to have access to it and know that it exists. It's included in your handouts. We're about to talk about the use of the LEA worksheet in CMS. As of now, there are no other LEAs that are using this worksheet, though this may change in time.
Next, we will discuss how the Mecklenburg County Juvenile Court Community and the CMS EC Department are working together on this issue. The first way is through the CMS DSS Educational Liaisons. Hopefully, you are all aware of this important resource. CMS DSS Educational Liaisons provide consultation and assistance to serve the children and students who are active with Mecklenburg County's DSS and enrolled in CMS. We are fortunate to have these positions in CMS. We have listed here some of the ways that they will be assisting with the processes we have laid out today. They will provide documentation from the CFT and court to Kimberly Stewart within the CMS EC department. This includes the DSS/GAL worksheet each time it is completed for a CMS student, and the parent/SEDM order when someone is appointed. School staff have a hard time knowing who is on the CFT, which is especially important for our students with IEPs. The liaisons are going to bridge that gap by helping the CMS EC department show which DSS child welfare worker and supervisor is assigned to a student. The CMS EC department will also be able to use the DSS/GAL worksheet, which lists the members of the CFT to help the individual school know who was involved. The liaisons will be available to assist with questions about completion of the worksheets. Lastly, as always, they are available to help troubleshoot education issues that arise for CMS students with Mecklenburg County DSS custody, whether or not they have an IEP.
Next, we're going to discuss implementation of the Who Can Serve as the Parent or SEDM worksheet within CMS. It's important that everyone involved with the child knows who is serving as the child's parent or SEDM. Therefore, when the DSS GAL worksheet is completed for a CMS student, it will be shared with the CMS EC department. In those situations, an LEA version of the worksheet will not be completed. The CMS EC department will have access to the DSS GAL worksheet to be available to assist the child's individual school with support as needed. The CMS EC department has provided and will continue to provide training to appropriate school level staff about how to identify an appropriate parent or SEDM and how to use the LEA worksheet as a tool in that determination. The last area you want to cover that is specific to collaboration with CMS is about invitations to IEP meetings. There are a lot of important people involved in the lives of children in foster care beyond the individual who is serving as the parent or SEDM, especially since we know that the DSS child welfare worker and the GAL volunteer are not even allowed to be considered as the parent or SEDM. Therefore, it's critical to have the right people at the table for IEP meetings. In the past, CMS would only invite the parent or SEDM to IEP meetings and would leave it to the parent or SEDM to invite other members of the child and family team. This was problematic, especially when the parent or SEDM was a district-assigned surrogate parent who did not know the members of the child family team. It resulted in IEP meetings for children in foster care happening without any members of the CFT present. Moving forward, CMS will begin to do the following for children in DSS custody in CMS. CMS will formally invite the parent or SEDM to the meeting. On the invitation to conference document, it will indicate that the child and family team will attend the meeting as well. CMS will notify the DSS child welfare worker and request that they invite the rest of the child family team. CMS will also notify Kim Nichols or Jill Eford, the CMS DSS educational liaisons, about the meeting. Kim and Jill are able to help send out the information to a child's CFT if requested by the DSS child welfare worker. As CMS DSS educational liaisons, they can use their CMS email addresses, so would not be encrypted email, since that's often a barrier for the CFT members. In order for Kim or Jill to send out the information, the DSS child welfare worker needs to send an email to Kim or Jill requesting this and include the names and email addresses of the child and family team members who need to be notified about the IEP meeting. While the parent or SEDM is the only required member of the IEP team from the CFT, this new process should help make sure that the whole child and family team is included in IEP meetings.
I'm going to explain the process for identifying the parent SEDM within Mecklenburg County CDSA for early intervention services decisions. The CDSA does not use the Who Can Serve as a Parent SEDM LEA worksheet, but instead has its own internal process for identifying who is serving as the child's parent SEDM. This decision is made by the CDSA as soon as the referral for early intervention services is received. The Mecklenburg County CDSA currently has early intervention specialists co-located within youth and family service districts. Those staff are assigned to all referrals made by DSS child welfare workers and reach out to those DSS child welfare workers to gain feedback about parental involvement, case planning, and court involvement prior to making a decision related to the parent SEDM. Also, those staff members are available at any time to cast staff cases with child welfare social workers. Once the DSS child welfare worker and GAL volunteer complete the Who Can Serve as Parent SEDM DSS GAL worksheet, the DSS child welfare worker and GAL volunteer should be in touch with the CDSA. They should find out who the CDSA determined is serving as the parent SEDM and verify that it is consistent with the information on the worksheet. The CDSA and the CFT should all be on the same page about who is serving as the parent SEDM. If the court appoints someone to serve as the parent or SEDM for a child receiving early intervention services, the DSS child welfare worker and GAL volunteer should be sure to send the order to the CDSA. The court-appointed individual will then serve as the parent SEDM. Additionally, when developing the IFSP team, early intervention service coordinators are required to ensure the team is multidisciplinary and, with the consent of the parent SEDM, invite support staff to be included within the IFSP team, which would include the DSS child welfare worker and the GAL volunteer. When DSS child welfare workers and GAL volunteers are members of the IFSP team, they are included in all IFSP reviews and case updates from the CDSA Early Intervention Service Coordinator. If anyone has questions about this process for children in need of or receiving early intervention services in Mecklenburg County, you can always contact me, Lindsay Moss.
I want to briefly bring us back to the beginning of the training when we looked at the statistics about educational outcomes for children in foster care. As you all know, there tend to be many people involved in the lives of children in foster care, and sometimes there's not effective communication between all of those individuals. We're going to share some best practices when it comes to information sharing between the CFT, CDSA, and LEA, and parent/SEDM. Each child and family team is different and handles communication in different ways. Therefore, we are not suggesting who from the CFT should be responsible for information sharing and communication with the child's LEA or CDSA. We would suggest, however, that the child and family team expressly talk about how communication and information sharing will be handled so everyone is on the same page. For children with IEPs, they have an EC case manager. For children receiving early intervention services, they have an early intervention service coordinator. These are important people for the CFT to know. The CFT should maintain regular contact with the child's EC case manager or early intervention service coordinator for the following reasons. First, the CFT should provide updates about the child that may be relevant to the child's school performance or to early intervention service provision. We have included some examples here, such as placement changes, physical and mental health, service providers in the child's life, and upcoming court hearings. The point here is that the child's school needs to be aware of things happening in the child's life that may impact the child at school. All of this will depend on the specific child and their circumstances. For instance, sometimes it is helpful that the school know about a child's visitation schedule with their parents if the visits cause the child some anxiety. If the child is receiving services outside of school, that information should be shared with the school. There are many examples, but the main point is that the CFT needs to remember how things happening outside of the child's life at school can impact the child during their school day, and teachers can better support the child if they are aware of these circumstances. Next, the CFT should communicate about any upcoming IEP or IFSP meetings. We have already discussed the process with CMS for invitations to IEP meetings. That process is not in place for other LEAs, such as other school districts, charter schools, or PRTFs. Lastly, the CFT should be reaching out to the EC case manager to receive regular updates about the child's educational performance. Often, the parent/SEDM is a regular member of the child and family team, such as when the individual serving as the parent/SEDM is the parent or placement provider, such as the non-therapeutic foster parent or kinship placement. In those circumstances, there's not much that needs to be done to ensure that the individual serving as parent/SEDM is informed about important updates about the child. In other circumstances, however, diligent effort needs to be made by the CFT to ensure that the individual serving as the parent/SEDM knows about important updates about the child. Remember, the parent/SEDM is the individual making decisions in IEP and IFSP meetings about the child. It is critical that this individual makes informed decisions. Ideally, the individual serving as parent/SEDM becomes a part of the CFT. The CFT must make a specific point to update and educate the parent/SEDM when the individual serving in that role is an LEA or CDSA assigned surrogate parent volunteer. The majority of the time, the surrogate parent has no prior relationship with the child or the CFT. He or she may know very little about the child, their needs, or their background. The CFT must facilitate the surrogate parent getting to know the child to be able to effectively advocate for the child's needs.
So a common question we get is how the child and family team and/or the parent/SEDM can learn about early intervention and special education resources. It's one thing to know who's supposed to make the decisions in an IFSP or IEP meeting, and it's another thing to learn how the processes work. Reviewing these processes in depth is beyond the scope of the training, but we want to be able to point you in a direction that could help you. For early intervention services, Mecklenburg County's CDSA would be an initial step, and we've included the website link here. That has some really helpful information about the process, and you can, of course, contact them directly. The website for the North Carolina Infant Toddler Program has a great deal of information, including explanations, forms, handbooks, and FAQs. And lastly, the Exceptional Children's Assistance Center, ECAC, is the Parent Training Information Center for North Carolina under the IDEA. ECAC has a wealth of resources, including a parent educator's one-on-one assistance to families navigating these services. ECAC also provides free workshops and trainings and is both in person across the state or in website format. There are many resources to help both professionals and families understand the special education process. CMS's EC department has a website with links to many resources for families. The department also has an EC parent liaison to help address concerns. And as I mentioned, ECAC provides statewide support for both early intervention and special education. The Council for Children's Rights provides free trainings on special education and other topics related to education advocacy. The First Wednesday workshops provide free trainings to families and organizations. They are held on the first Wednesday of each month during the school year, and they're held at 12 p.m. The trainings are also available on demand, so they can be accessed at your convenience. And lastly, in your resources, we've included a handout, A Parent's Guide to Special Education in North Carolina. This was developed by the Children's Law Clinic at Duke Law School and provides a detailed explanation of the special education process. It's a great resource for both families and professionals.
As we wrap up, let's briefly review the most important points and lay out next steps as you incorporate these new processes into your practice. The first thing to do for DSS child welfare workers and GAL volunteers, if you have not already, is to evaluate all of your cases. Please do this as soon as possible. Make a list of all of your cases where the child has an IEP or IFSP. Next, add to the list all cases where you suspect the child needs to be referred for an IEP or IFSP. Remember, no worksheet needs to be completed for students who have a Section 504 plan, because it is the DSS child welfare worker who holds those rights. The DSS child welfare worker and GAL volunteers should collaborate to complete the Who Can Serve as Parent/SEDM DSS GAL worksheet for each child on that list as soon as possible. Send a copy of the completed worksheets to your assigned CMS DSS educational liaison. Please do this as soon as possible. Discuss the outcome of each worksheet with the child and family team to determine next steps and whether to request a court order from the judge. If you have not started completing these worksheets already, it is expected that you will complete these immediately. As you move forward, the Who Can Serve as Parent/SEDM worksheet should become part of your practice. When you have a new child on your caseload who either has an IEP or IFSP, or you suspect that they need an IEP or IFSP, complete the worksheet. As a reminder, the worksheets need to be updated at these times, whenever a child changes placement and before each court hearing, and attached to the court summary or court report. Each time that the worksheet is updated, send the updated version to the CMS DSS Educational Liaison. We have created a website of resources about the information we discussed today. It has the forms, important terms, FAQs, a history of the SEDM work group, and we'll eventually have a recorded version of this training. We'll put a link in the chat. Bookmark it so that you can use it as a resource. We have a short post-training survey we would like you to complete now, and we'll put the link in the chat. I'll put both of those links in right now. Okay, I see Cindy is doing that. Thank you, Cindy. Throw them in there too. This will help us add additional information to the SEDM resource website. Additionally, to receive credit from your organization for attending this training, you must complete the survey. We'll take some time now to answer the questions you have added to the chat throughout the training, and we will also use these questions to develop more FAQs on the SEDM resource website. And you may reach out to me or Cindy Scruggs Johnson if you have any questions following the training. So I'm happy to answer those questions and would love if you would spend some time completing your post-training survey now as well, so you don't forget. Thank you.
So Stephanie, we do have 2 questions, and if any others come in, we can take those 2. The first question is, why is TFC placement not permitted to serve as SEDM, but regular foster parents can?
This is a very common question that we have in North Carolina. The North Carolina policies governing services for children with disabilities specifically says therapeutic foster parents are not able to serve. I believe that it's considered a conflict of interest. There is some overlap between what can qualify as a special education service or related service and outside services. And so it's looked at as potentially a conflict if for advocacy for somebody that's receiving money for providing a treatment service while also advocating for treatment services in the school setting. So I believe that that's the reasoning behind that.
The next question is, if the LEA has assigned a surrogate, but the DSS worker is not aware and asks the court to assign an SEDM, what happens in this situation?
Okay, so if the court appoints somebody, the court appointed person is the person that will serve as the parent/SEDM. So if the district had identified a surrogate, but then a court order is obtained, whether or not they knew about that court order now trumps that assignment, and it's the court appointed individual that will serve moving forward. We are hoping that this process of completing the worksheets, if you are a GAL volunteer or a DSS worker and you're completing the worksheet and you get to the question about surrogate parent volunteer, that if you don't know the answer, that will prompt that communication. We're hoping that this is raising awareness of this initial step that needs to be taken of figuring out who's making decisions for students and ideally increase the communication between the school system and the child and family team. I see, is that only in Mecklenburg County? No, that's not. If there's a court order, it is the court appointed person who serves. The school district cannot make a different decision, and that's across the state, and also applies if the child moves to a different state. That court order is going to continue to dictate who is making the special education decisions. Did you say at the beginning of the training that the form should be attached to every single hearing report? Yes, that is the case. Every time there's a court hearing, that the worksheet should be updated. And a lot of the time, not much is going to change. You can go in there, and if you have the saved version of it, change the date, verify that the rest of the information remains the same, and just attach that to the court summary or court report. The resource website has the PDF versions of the worksheets. I understand that YFS uses OneDrive. We do have fillable Word versions of the worksheet. And so if that is easier in your practice to do that using OneDrive, please shoot me an email. I'm happy to share the Word versions of the documents as well. We're happy to answer any additional questions you have, but if you have completed your post-training survey and you don't have any other questions, you are welcome to sign off. We thank you so much for being here today. And can social worker make decisions about Section 504 plans? Great question. Yes, it's the social worker that holds those rights. So it's no, when a child comes into DSS custody, it's a social worker who makes the decisions about Section 504 plans and signs those associated consents. If we have a surrogate identified in Mecklenburg, but a kid moves to Cabarrus, can we use the same surrogate? So this is a great question. And part of one of the reasons why we are saying that court orders can be helpful, because if that surrogate parent volunteer in Mecklenburg County is willing to be court ordered, then there's no question when the child moves to a different county. But typically what happens is that each school district has their own set of volunteer surrogate parents. And so it's up to that individual volunteer whether when the child moves, whether the volunteer will remain serving that role. Cabarrus County, if not, Cabarrus County would identify their own surrogate. Often when children are changing counties, those surrogates are not remaining with the child for practical reasons, for traveling reasons. And so it can create a lot of transition. So in that sort of situation, it's great to have that conversation directly with the surrogate parent volunteer to find out whether they're willing to do that. And then that surrogate parent volunteer would have to just make sure with Cabarrus County that the training that they received in Mecklenburg counts for Cabarrus County and it can continue to serve that role. These are great questions. Thank you.